everybody. Welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast. Robbie here, but I'm also joined by Alex Swallow.
Hello.
And Alex Whitton.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Alex is. And welcome everybody to the show. So we've got a team episode this week when we're going to be looking back over the last 90-odd episodes of the podcast. And it came about in a slightly funny way, which is that we were due to record with the whole host team just before Christmas. And for various reasons, we didn't end up recording that episode. And it would have been a very normal kind of podcast or blog or news site thing to do around that time of year, to come out early Jan, a bit around like review of 2024 and all that kind of thing. But by the time we could try and get everybody in the diary, and as you can tell, we still didn't manage that. We had a couple of last minute people with other commitments. It was a bit late to do a review anyway, but we got to thinking, particularly Alex Whitton and I, bouncing some ideas around on WhatsApp about what's the spirit of that episode that we would have done that we don't want to lose. And what we came to was we're going to introduce to you, share with you some of the most important practical takeaways that we've taken from 90-odd episodes of the Coach's Journey podcast. And hopefully that'll do some signposting to great episodes that you've forgotten about and bring us really into what we think the Coach's Journey is here to do, which is help everyone with the potential to be an amazing coach to do amazing coaching. And hopefully the practical things we're going to share with you, the takeaways we've had from the amazing guests and the reflections on this podcast will help you do that. And also that, our vision is that no one quits coaching because the business of coaching is too hard. So some of them may be to do with that too. And of course, everything that's to do with the core of coaching is to do with the business of coaching because, as per the Coach's Journey, the coaching business flywheel and many other things, doing great coaching is a really important part of having a sustainable business. So we're going to get to that. But before we do that, we're going to do what we do in all our Coach's Journey team meetings, which is, I remember it, but Alex, correct me if this is wrong, which came up with in one meeting. I think I just decided to do it. And it's turned out to be like the best meeting check-in that I've ever done. And we do it every time now because there's basically no better meeting check-in, which is we're going to check in with one thing that's inspired us in the last week. And so as I'm doing a tiny bit more intro, you, listener, can be thinking about what's inspired you in the last week. One of the reasons that, I guess there are two reasons that I'm really aware at the moment of what a powerful check-in it is. So one is I did some work with Robert Holden over 2024 around his work on higher purpose. And one of the things he says is you can't define your purpose, you can only discover it. And one of the ways to discover your purpose is to follow inspiration, because purpose is inspiration. And inspiration tells you a lot about purpose. And the other reason it's a great check-in, and in fact the reason that all check-ins are great check-ins, as long as they tell you something about the other person, is that, as Jennifer Garvey-Berger said at a conference I was at last year, she designs now for connection first and content after, because the greater the connection between the people who are having the conversation or at the meeting, the easier the business goes. And we've certainly found that to be true. And what we've noticed about inspiration check-ins, we haven't shared what we're going to check in with now, so we'll see if this rings true, is that they're usually a fantastic way to connect more with each other. And this is my reflection anyway, Alex and Alex, that they tend to be either a deeply personal thing or a really quite like, or just like the more classic resource, this is an amazing thing that I've come across thing, or an amazing idea. So it's like there's a really interesting split of them. And it doesn't seem to matter whether somebody's talking about their child or their sibling, or they're talking about, or their old friend. I remember you, Alex, checking in with about your friend who had just turned 100. It's like it whether it's a kind of deeply personal relational thing or some really amazing idea. So let's do that. And I think, Alex Swallow, you're going to go first. What's been inspirational to you in the last week or so?
Love it. You've really set me up there, Robbie. I feel like I have the pressure to come up with a good one there.
You've absolutely got to come up with a really good one now. Otherwise, the whole episode's going to stop.
Well, one thing I was going to add to what you're saying about how we use them to check in with each other as podcast co-hosts is that I find I get so much from other people explaining theirs, both that I learn from what it is they're explaining, but also I just feel that energy shift as they're explaining the thing that is really amazing for them. And then I take away a bit of that myself. And so for the listener now, as well as Robbie saying, thinking about your own one, it's kind of, as we're talking about ours, they may relate to you or they may not, but hopefully you'll hear our energy shift and the things that are interesting for us and that. So,
and
yes,
before you go on, Alex, that's such an interesting point. Do you think when you're hearing someone else speaking about something that inspires them, and I guess this happens to us in coaching, quite often actually, like But when you're hearing that, do you think you're feeling their energy about, like, are you getting the energy shift because their energy is shifting to inspiration, or is it what they're talking about, or I mean, probably a mixture of both things usually are, but yeah, what's your take?
I think it's probably a mixture of both things. I think one of the things is just that I basically really like all the hosts, and so hearing people I like be happy makes me happy. So there's that aspect of it. So I'm not sure. It'd be a really interesting experiment whether it worked the same for me if it was strangers. That I'm not sure about. I think for me it's partly it's the imagining what it would be like for me in that experience as well. So I'm trying to relate it to what it would be like for me. And I think our brains sort of come up with those patterns. So if somebody is talking about a particular situation I haven't been in, but there's a relatable aspect, that's more likely to trigger, I think, a potential memory or a kind of realization that I've had that sort of experience as well. And that enables me to feel their emotion more, I imagine.
Love it. Let's stop talking about it and do it, shall we? Alex, yeah, as I said before, and then I distracted you. What's been inspiring you in the last week, Alex Swallow?
Thanks, Robbie. No, it's lovely to actually reflect on that, because I think it just, as you say, it just emerged from our group. I think you decided to try it one day, but it's always such a lovely part of the call. My one was yesterday I went to an event which was on productivity. I'm going to cheat very slightly. I kind of had two things I want to mention. One was that one thing I found really inspiring was that I just bumped into quite a few people I know. And seeing as I'm not originally from Sheffield, it always brings me great joy to bump into people that I know and sort of feel that I'm in a sort of collegiate atmosphere of people I already know a little bit. So that was amazing, just bumping into people. I mean, I bumped into one guy in the toilets, which was a bit embarrassing. But then just that feeling that I'm part of something. But the particular thing I realised I wanted to mention was we're in this beautiful room in the Millennium Galleries, are in the heart of Sheffield. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a really beautiful, quite a modern building, quite a lot of light. And the conference or the event was held in this room that I'd been in before for an exhibition of a local artist called Pete McKee, who's very locally famous. But what I hadn't realised from the room was the view that you could see out the window. Maybe I was focusing on the art last time. And it was particularly as I went along to the end of the room to get a coffee, I looked out and I saw part of Sheffield from a perspective I've never seen before. There's this long view leading past Sheffield Hallam University to the cholera monument on the hill. And the cholera monument was significant for me for a number of reasons. But one is that during COVID, the idea that there's this very symbolic reminder of another pandemic to hit the city, I found both a bit creepy and kind of interesting that there was that monument to that. But this particular view, I was saying to the guy doing the catering what a lovely view it was, because it was beautiful. But what I realized was that I'd stood in a similar place many times before, but here I was about, 40 foot up in the air, 50 foot up in the air. And just that slight change of perspective meant a whole different view. And I just hadn't realised that you could see that view. And every time I went to get the coffee, I had another look at that view to sort of believe it was still there. So that's mine.
So nice. So nice. For some reason, it makes me think of, I was making a middle calendar of photos of our family for grandparents. And Emma has had, I forgot to change it, this is my wife Emma, people who don't know, had her selfie settings set so that it has the picture of like in mirror. So when you take a selfie, it shows you like a mirror, otherwise you'd freak out because it's really weird to see it. But then you can have the setting to either have the photo be that mirror image or have the photo put back to what it should be so that you're seeing it from where the thing is. And like, it was really interesting to look at it and be like, my brain can't compute where this photo is, even though I know for sure it's in my kitchen, because everything is backwards because we're so used to one way. So I love the idea that 40 feet transforms the view, right? Because 40 feet is not much. Beautiful. Thanks, Alex. Alex Whitton, how about you? What's inspired you in the last week?
I'll add two things to that. One is, like, there's a temptation from what you were saying, Alex, just go, well, Alex's inspiration checking has inspired me, and we could probably do that perpetually. That'd be a really fun hour. but probably goes back to what Alex was saying about inspiration. And yeah, as we've slowed down on it, it really is a beautiful window into something that probably connects all of us, is that there's always something that inspires us all. And there's at some point something that resonates with us in that bit of inspiration. Like I felt a tingle as you talked about the Colorado Monument, Alex, and that sense of perspective. And yeah, so that was really beautiful. So thank you. And my inspiration is another Alex, which I say just because there's two Alex on the call, and before the podcast we were talking about how our supremacy of the coach's journey is continuing. And yeah, essentially this Alex though is an Alexander. So I'm reading a book called The Invention of Nature, which is about a guy called Alexander Humboldt, who was around in the late 1700s, 1800s, and probably still true that no one else has had more things named after them. And just what I love about it is he's essentially the guy that's given us our sort of perception of nature as it is today, which is the idea that nature is a system of interconnected things that rely on one another. So there's that interconnectedness and interdependence, which in itself feels inspiring, because it's like, oh wow, that's cool that it's only really 250 years old, that idea. And now we take it for granted, and it's inspiring to think about actually what are all the things that make life what it is that we just take for granted, which feels inspiring. But also what inspires me is reading this book, just get the energy of this guy who was climbing at that point what they thought was the highest mountain in the world, which is in South America, having got an infected foot because he climbed another mountain, completely unprepared for climbing the mountain, because he was probably wearing a waistcoat because it was the late 1700s, early 1800s. His shoes were torn to shreds, and he just kept going. The porters, who were local guides, refused to go higher, and he just kept going because he was just so fascinated. And every 100 meters, despite the fact they were sort of knee deep in snow, he would take more temperature readings, more atmospheric pressure readings. And then what was really cool is he didn't quite get to the top of the mountain, which I think is, in some ways, I found nice, because you almost feel like the perfect story is that he gets to the peak of the mountain and then gets back down. And he literally couldn't, because there's so much snow that the person he was going with took one step and went waist deep into the snow, and they had to drag him out. But was then this concept of nature that he came up with, he illustrated by basically drawing this mountain at every level, putting, well, these are the animals and the plants I found, and then going, these are the animals and plants at the same level in other parts of the world, to kind of illustrate this. And why it was it was so wonderful in two ways is because it was a visualization of sort of nature in a way that scientific times kind of would just be here's a load of tables and here's a load of stats, and he kind of managed to put this together. But supposedly he was really good friends with Goethe, who was a romantic writer. And when Goethe got the book he wrote, it was missing this diagram, but Goethe was so excited, he basically drew the same thing and sent it to Humboldt and was like, I think this is great. This is my kind of cheeky approach to illustrating it. And then 7 weeks later, he got the diagram, loved it so much that he pinned it to his wall where he traveled next. So just kind of inspired by that idea of curiosity and adventure without the regard for, I can't really climb this mountain because I haven't got the right gear. It's the right gear doesn't exist then. And yeah, the fact that he was the most experienced mountaineer at the time, not because he wanted to climb mountains, but just because he had this undwindling curiosity about the world. So yeah, and what's even better is he's called Alex.
Yeah, so many Alexes in the Coach's Journey community over the years. So many references to Alex. So good. But yeah, I mean, Alex, I feel like we could just do the whole rest of the episode on Humboldt and mountain climbing and Goethe. And yeah, you just did an amazing job. At the end there, I was like, oh, this is why Alex loves it right now, right? We can hear this idea. He became this thing kind of accidentally through curiosity, despite having none of the right gear. So this is the metaphor that all of us can use for the adventures we go on. right? Yeah, how nice. How nice. Do you know, talking about Goethe reminds me that I listened to a great old Tim Ferriss interview, not that old, with Martha Beck from last year, where they talk a bit about Goethe on there. And I was just like, what a cool person, Goethe. Should know more about him. Mine, I think I'm going to stick with this rather than doing a little Martha Beck Ferriss riff. I think I'm going to stick with what I was going to talk about, though, which is that I discovered last week. So let me try and do this pretty quickly because there's a 12-minute article that people can read on it. So I've been aware for a while that the Greeks had two words for time, chronos and kairos. Chronos being kind of business as usual time, and kairos being kind of chaos time, or like with a time where things go differently. I didn't know that Chronos and Kairos were the names of ancient Greek gods. So they were personified. Alex Swallow is nodding his head. I'm like, Alex, come on, you could have told me years ago. What I loved about it is that so Chronos, he like in the kind of what do you call it? Like, I don't know, you guys will know, the kind of, it's like a really old painting on a wall or something that they've still got of Chronos. Is like, he's a bit Grim Reaper-esque. I mean, not really. He's like an old guy, but he's got a little sickle in the one that I've seen. And so he is like the god of time. That's how they talk about him. And then Kairos is the god of the right moment. And like, that is cool. That was like, that is so cool. That is really important to be able to imagine praying to the god of the right moment. And it's just like everywhere I see this now. So what's interesting about Kairos in the etching or the like carving that I saw of him, he's got something of the Roman god Mercury, who's a little bit like Hermes in ancient Greece. So he's got these like winged heels, and he's kind of the messenger. And my counselor and I, we have these weird conversations. We have this theory that Alex Swallow, you'll like this, and probably Alex Whitton as well, but maybe a bit less. Like, we have this theory that football stadia are modern temples to the god Mercury, because they're all about the tricksters, right? It's all about the unexpected. That's what really makes it good, right? And in fact, even in football, like, we even use the word mercurial to describe the very best, most interesting, exciting players, right? Messi, Cantona, Letitia, Bergkamp, all these players who are really magical in football are mercurial talents, because even we know that it's a temple to Mercury despite that. Chronos and Kairos give us a much more interesting take on first football, and then I'll get to it, coaching, right? Which is, football is a weird sport, right? Unlike rugby. Rugby, I think, has eliminated some. So Alex Whitton is a big rugby fan, as you go back to the interview I did with him. So rugby has eliminated a bit of Kairos from it. But football's really interesting. So it's a 90-minute game, like every game. That's what everyone calls it. So that's Chronos, right? We have some rules. Time is going to go like this. It's going to go minute by minute until you get to the end of the half of football, where there is a seemingly made-up amount of time made up by the ref, right? Where we get an extra now, it's kind of 7 minutes for chaos to ensue. And the weird thing about it is the ref, whose job it is to maintain the rules, Chronos, makes up this amount of time, Kairos. And then he just gets to decide at the end of it when it finishes. And sometimes he decides to wait until like a bit of play is finished. And sometimes he blows up in the middle of it. And if he blows up in the middle of it, even if the time is right, i.e. Chronos is up, everyone knows it's the wrong thing to do, because we're not honoring Kairos, the god of the right moment, in that moment. Okay. So this then got me and Julia thinking, right? We might think of those two gods as being in opposition. That it's either we need a structure of Chronos, this is how long it's going to be, this is what it's going to be like, or we want more of just the right moment. But actually, it wouldn't work if it was all just the right moment, right? You have to have this kind of Chronos for the magical Kairos moment to happen. And then, of course, what I see in that is straight away is coaching, right? Is we have these regular sessions of some kind. And what I found is, and we might get into this, if you don't have the regular sessions, it's really hard to get Kairos, right? It's really hard to have if you're not meeting every 2 weeks or every week or 3 times a month or whatever it is, it's really hard to have a session at just the right moment. Because what you try and do as the client is you know you want some coaching. So you try and book it in the diary. By the time it's in the diary, it's like, even if it's 3 days later, the right moment is gone. And so I think that this is like a really important lesson for us. You know, it reminds me a little bit, this isn't one of my practical takeaways, but second time Toku McCree came on the podcast, we had this interesting exchange about kind of grinding through coaching sometimes. And or whether it's like what are we aiming for? We were kind of discussing. Are we aiming for the moments that feel like magic? Or is it perfect to have the moments that feel like a grind? And this gives me a better perspective on it, I think, which is that, well, really both. But, honestly, what I'm looking for in coaching, like the moments that everyone remembers are the moments of total kairos, when we have this like crazy moment where someone says something to someone and the world shifts. They suddenly see the world from 40 feet up. But you can't have that without having the structure and the regularity. And the last piece, and then I'd love to hear your reflections on wherever we are, and then let's do some practical takeaways. The last piece it made me think of is, I think this is why, sometimes you've heard something like 5 times, you've heard an insight 5 times, and then at the last minute, or for some reason, the 6th time you hear it, it lands.
Hi everybody, just a quick thing before we get back to the show. I wanted to let you know about a free ebook available at www.thecoachesjourney.com. It's called An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel, and it's the most important piece of content I've ever created for coaches, boiling down everything I've learned from this show, from working with master coaches, and from my own experience, all into one simple model. The model not only tells you the only things you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business, but also shows you how they can form a virtuous circle that keeps your coaching business growing. It's all free, and you can find it at thecoachesjourney.com, or there's a link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
And that's because you've got this little winged Greek god, flying past, just going, here's the message for you, as the messenger. And maybe this is me, like trying to do slightly too much of a segue, but like maybe this would be what it'll be today for somebody, because somebody listening today may have listened to a whole bunch of the episodes that we've talked about. We may have, but I have no doubt that when you guys share some of the practical takeaways you've taken from the last 5 or so years of this show, that there'll be things that I barely remember and I'll hear again. So, Alex Swallow, anything you want to share in this moment before we switch gears?
Well, firstly, just to reiterate what I said again, like it was so beautiful to hear you both speaking. And I think on the things that were inspiring to you. And I think one of the things that you both gave me an insight into was that I think you're both good storytellers. And so I think that also perhaps places you in the situation more. So when I'm talking about, feeling that empathy and understanding other the emotion they're experiencing, like I was there with both of you in both of the things that you're talking about. And also, Robbie, I have to say that I was wondering whether a lot of the players on the football pitch will also be wearing Nike boots. And Nike is also a link.
What is Nike? Do we remember?
I can't, I don't know whether I'll probably guess completely wrong. It might mean victory or something, but I believe the Parthenon was a shrine to Athena Nike, but I may be completely wrong. But they potentially just borrow the name. It's nothing to do with it. But I was like, oh, there's a potential other bit. But I was like, maybe Nike.
She was the Greek goddess of victory. I've just looked it up.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
I thought
she probably knew Kronos and Kairos. They probably messed around together. Alex Whitton, what do you notice? And then take us into a practical takeaway from 90 odd episodes of the Coach's Journey.
I mean, the first thing is a question, which is maybe one I'll leave with everyone, which is like when you said Kronos, I was like, which if I remember is God of like the right moment.
Oh, all the way around. So Kronos
Kairos,
is like normal time. Kairos.
Yeah. What a great way to introduce yourself. Like, and it was just like, if you were a dinner party of the pantheon of the gods, who would you love to say you are? Because I would really love to go, I'm the God of the right moment.
I mean, maybe because I love when Julia told me this, I loved it, and maybe all coaches, really in a way. That's why one of the reasons I'm interested to share it, because coaching requires the right moment, always, and you can't predict it, and you can't make it happen, and you can't you can look. I remember I think when Claire Pedrick came on for the Human Behind the Coach episode, we were talking there. I think about you can read the transcript of someone's coaching session and it looked like, I think, an MCC transcript, and then you hear it and it's not, because it wasn't all the right moment wasn't there the whole way through.
It also makes me think that the business of coaching is is you have to have both, don't you? It's like being in time and then the right moment arising as a result of that. But I think but it's like, it's not enough just to allow time to pass. It's like there's the active nature of being in it, which is funny I say that, because as you were talking, Robbie, I was really reminded of the most recent interview I did, which was with Philip Crocker. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but like a big theme was the idea for him that the right work comes to you at the time that is right for you in terms of stuff you do as a coach. And that's not to sit back and go, oh yeah, the right work's going to come. It's that you are actively sharing yourself and the work you do. And it means that you could then have 10 conversations with people, but only one of them transpires into coaching, because that's the right time for you and them to work together. And it doesn't then mean those other 9 people or organizations don't come back at some point in the future. But I think it's a really lovely like a balance, I suppose, in recognizing like in all things probably in life and what we want, they will come about at the right time, but actually we have to be present to what we want and to life to be able to notice them as well, which also feels like a really great lens for this episode, because it's like I'm almost certain the things that stand out to me looking through some of the notes I've taken from the shows I listen to are probably because it's absolutely like medicine I need to better take now, or can almost like reuse. It's that like paying attention to bit that you've talked about before, Robbie.
Just to catch though, Alex, I think there's I love that point about the coaching business. I hadn't thought about that, but we can absolutely see it to be true, right? We can see it to be true that like all we can do really is put ourselves in the situation with prospective clients where it might be the right moment. Like that's what we have control over. And then you get there and you have to just, what a beautiful reflection. And yeah, people definitely check out that interview with Philip. That is a cool episode. And, but yeah, exactly right. So if we go back to the coaching business flywheel, you have to offer the opportunities to people. You have to take responsibility for that, because that's the bit that's on you. And the way I find that it works really well to do that is to trust intuition, right? To notice that somebody's been in my mind a lot, or that I get really excited when I meet somebody, and then make the offer. And then you have to then let it go and see if it's the right time. And sometimes it will be, and sometimes it won't. And you don't know where the seed planted will lead. Always come back to that metaphor. So yeah, Alex Whitton, tell us, let's shift gears. So we're going to do it like another half hour, 40 minutes or something. And we're going to get into some of these practical takeaways, although we're already in it and I love it. So yeah, Alex, what's top of your list? Like what stands out to you most from your time as a listener and the host? Because I guess I'm really aware that for a lot of this, like I'm the host, and so it is a slightly different feel. But what stands out for you?
I think the one I want to pick up first is the one that I've probably tried practicing most and has been really interesting, which came from a collection of, I think, videos you did, Robbie, and then talked about. And it's this idea of proposing work as a coach as an engagement, as a period of time rather than as a chunk of sessions. So, for example, it might be like I work with people for 4 months, and we can have as many sessions up to weekly as we want. But the distinction is so that, as I understand it, is the time base gives us, well, we're doing this work in a period of time, so it's not limitless. So there's some accountability there. There's the flexibility that actually it could be that we really want to like spin the wheel early, so do lots of work together and then come back towards the end, or it could be that we want to speed that pace up as the end of that time comes. And then that distinction that I think why it resonated with me was this idea of, in proposing a number of sessions, it almost dilutes the power of the time of working together, or the power of the like period of engagement, in that, well, partly people probably discount the effort required from them, but also the value of a coaching session is not just the hour, an hour and a half you sit with someone. It's all of the time in between, and the consistency as well of showing up, which goes back to the Chronos and Kairos aspect as well. It's like, well, we're almost probably, if we go, I've got 6 sessions, putting a lot of pressure on in those 6 hours, I need to find these answers. Whereas actually it's far more this shift what I want to happen in this period of time. And here's a space in which I can consider where I'm going and how I'm getting there. So I found that really, really interesting. And on a really practical point, freeing in the sense of being able to propose coaching at a rate that would be more sustainable to if I was to simply have a one-to-one business, while also being able to still make my work accessible in a way that it feels difficult to do for individual sessions, partly because, well, I do the thing that other people do when you propose 6 sessions, is you go, well, it's X pound an hour, which this whole proposing coaching is a period of time kind of overcomes, because it's that investment in the work that you want to do or the change you want to see over that period of time. So that's the thing. I can talk about how I've found it and go from there, but maybe I'll pause and see if there's any like initial reflections, obviously in part because I've learned this from you, Robbie, as well. So
I just learned, I mean, you can go back to that. It's in episode 8, or you can find a video on the Coach's Journey website of a kind of, it's like 10-minute video or something on the videos page on the coachesjourney.com. By the way, we'll put links to all the shows, all the episodes and things that we talk about in the show notes. Yeah, I mean, I learned it from one of the coaches that I worked with early on, and it just felt better to me for a whole bunch of the reasons that you've said and more. But yeah, I think it'd be great to hear a little bit more about, I guess, yeah, we've heard one really clear one, which is that somehow, and I think I found this to be true too, like it does shifts the energy around what you're selling. So I remember when I first bought coaching like that, I think, it's like, okay, I'm paying more than I want, but I'm going to get a lot of coaching here. And so like, although the initial amount that I was investing was actually more than I thought I would, it felt like better value and was better value. And so I hear that. And I also heard that there's like a pressure off thing for you and for the coaching. But what else? What have you seen be different since you started working in that way, or when you work that way compared to when you don't? Maybe you do both now.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting reflection is that it's not my, like, I don't do that in every time I propose work, and it's really interesting because there's partly a reflection of my sample set is probably not big enough to go, this is what I do differently fully. But it was probably one of the most insightful ones is I worked with someone as they were starting their own coaching business, and they were quite fresh out of their coaching training, which very much talked about, we deliver coaching as 6 sessions, typically over 12 weeks. And they kind of didn't get it. And so, and they kind of admitted that afterwards. They were like, it felt right that we just did a 2-week cadence. And so I didn't necessarily get like this whole time thing. And there's in part, I think there's one for me to learn how to frame it, because I've had it more recently where I've had a similar response where it's like almost this frustration where they quantify, but it's going to cost me X much these sessions, and that's all I can afford. But actually, in part, that like I appreciate that that's more tangible, and so sometimes easier to consider. I'm trying to think about that, because it's like if you went to the shops, like I want 9 bananas. I don't want all of the bananas I might possibly want over like 6 weeks. So although having said that, like I do notice that there is definitely a shift to these more subscription services. Like I was considering buying peanut butter on a subscription basis, and then realized that like I eat too much peanut butter too quickly to not feel shameful about how regularly it'd be delivered to my door. Whereas it feels right for me to make that journey to the supermarket to purchase the peanut butter instead. So yeah, there's also a little insight into my inner psychology. So
good. Yeah. But there is, right? There's a shift. Like it's more common now. You go to a coffee shop or whatever, and you can buy I don't know if they still do it. I think it almost bankrupted Pret a Manger in the UK, didn't it? Because people took their subscription and went crazy with it because they just went to buy everybody else's coffees on their own subscription, and they hadn't priced that into the model and things like that. But it does shift that energy. But yeah, not everyone wants it. I hear that. But I think that one of the things that really stood out for me was I heard somebody talking about they'd bought 6 sessions from their coach. It's one of the things that cemented that I would sell almost always by the period of time. And they were like holding on to the last one for the right moment. And like, whilst, we just talked about it, Kairos, like maybe that's a wise thing to do in some ways. For me, it felt like, okay, but that's not why you came to the coach. You didn't come to the coach now at this right moment in order to save a session for maybe a moment that'll never come in the future, right? That's a real it made me think of my scarcity stuff, right? I'll hold on to my last banana in case I one day need another banana, right? I'm not sure that this analogy completely goes, but rather than just being like, well, look, these are the bananas for now, and I'm going to eat them, and then at some point in the future, I'm going to trust that this is the right time to have a lot of bananas. Alex Swallow, save us from the bananas.
That was fascinating. I was laughing a lot about the peanut butter. That was brilliant. I think one of the things for me, and this is something that I think the podcast does really well, and I can say this now as a co-host, but for the much longer amount of time as an avid fan and listener of the show, is that I really think that it gives you those moments where you can choose to use or not, but someone's introduced a new concept. That's what I really like about it. And so, some coaches might try that method and it might not work for them because they want to work in a particular way with people, because the type of people they work with, that idea doesn't work for them, or they might find that it's good for some of their clients and not for others, etc. What's beautiful is that, like, what Alex was saying about, you come out of the coaching school, and by necessity, even if it's a really good coaching school, they have to standardize some things. Otherwise, all they're doing is telling you can do absolutely anything, and that's not necessarily going to be useful. So they might say, the typical coaching approach is to do X, or Y is something many people seem to consider. And so one thing that I find really interesting to listening to a show is that it's, the things I get out of it will be very different to what other people get out of it, because we're all at different moments in our life, going back to that perfect moment in time. And that also means that with different podcast episodes, if I listen to some of them right now, re-listen to them, or if I hadn't listened to them and sort of was able to go back in time and listen to it now for the first time, I feel that actually it lands with me differently because I've changed. And so that's the thing. Part of it was a moment in time that you, mainly as the host, Robbie, had with the podcast guest. It was a time in their life, a time in your life, a moment in history with things going on. You were recording during COVID, for example. And it was a time in my life when I listened to it and I was in a certain place. And so I think the difference and the sort of the interplay between those things is really, really fascinating for me, and means that one piece of content will resonate with people very differently.
Yeah, so true. Lovely reflections. I think to bridge, I'm going to talk about one of the ones that I've been thinking about a lot in the run-up to this call now, because I think it fits really nicely, because essentially I've been mostly selling coaching in that way that you're describing, Alex, over a period of time. I mean, like in associate work or working on behalf of other people, or sometimes if a company's buying coaching from me, I would like do something else because, they say this is how much we pay for coaching and I want to do it, and it involves a session rate and that kind of thing. But like basically in my own business, and there's a little problem that I've been spotting. I can't remember how much I talked about this on the show over the years, but which is kind of like, in a way, it's why the Coach's Journey community exists, because I used to run a group program, and one of the problems I wanted to solve was, well, what about the people for whom an intense 6-month program of coaching with an investment to go with it? Like, I don't think that it was like particularly more expensive, like per minute, than the Coach's Journey community. It might be less. Like, I'd have to go back and check, but you got a lot more coaching. It was like the group program was for people who are going to step up their coaching and their business right now in these 6 months. And that's what that time frame does. But I was in my own business, I was kind of seeing, well, it's not, I was like really structuring my engagements for those things, because that is the work that I love doing, like really my absolute favorite work. And so it should be structured like that. What I was noticing is there was a bunch of interesting people including, for example, sometimes former clients, right? Where it's no longer the right moment for 6 months of intense coaching. So what's the solution to that? And what is a way of working that I would really like to do? And then Bill Small came on the podcast. He was episode 48. Again, we'll put links. And he had this way of working, which is essentially something like this. We do 2 sessions a month, plus in between sessions, if people want extra, we can do any number of extra sessions between if people really need some time with Bill, but they'll always be like a 15-minute call. So it's like, again, we're kind of holding the structure of this slightly different. And people basically set up the payment. They pay, I can't remember how much it was for him, like $500 or $600 a month. They have to do it for a minimum of 3 months, but then it just rolls on. And I was interested in that for a few reasons, the reasons I've just said, plus to kind of build a little bit of a different rhythm into my business. Because otherwise, if I have a small number of clients, one-to-one clients, which I typically do, it can quite quickly go from my business feeling full to empty. If they all happen to end at the same time, it's pretty stressful. It's like, okay, I've now got 1 client all of a sudden, down from 4 or 5, and what am I going to do about that? Whereas the idea of this rolling, less intense work was really appealed. Now, what's interesting is that I've failed to sell that. I've sold coaching in that way loads of times, but I've never sold what Bill actually did, right? I've always managed to sell because, and we can talk about this a bit more, but I've sold loads of 2 sessions a month, plus little bits of laser coaching if you need it, engagements now. I found they work really well for selling to companies. Like if a former client of mine wants me to coach somebody in their team, this is a really, this is an easy engagement I found to sell to those people, especially because they're often budget holders. Like it just like, they get it. The amount doesn't seem to matter that much. And it's really easy to understand and feels like a good fit for feels like quite a nice structure. Going back, which kind of in 3 months is what you were saying, Alex, really. It's like 6 sessions over 12 or so weeks. And it is quite a nice rhythm. And I think a couple of things to catch. One is my coaching is better able to cope with taking someone through a transformation in that number of sessions over that period of time than it used to be. So that's one thing that I notice. So one of the reasons I moved to period of time and to 4 months, like you were saying, Alex, instead of 3, is it didn't feel like it enough. Like I wasn't quite holding people through the transformation in that amount of time. But I've never managed to move somebody into the rolling thing. I like endings too much, basically, I think. Like we have to say, to some extent, you have to say at the start to the budget holder in a company, again, perhaps it's that same thing, this is how it's going to go. Or they're coming with, this is how I want it to be. And you say, well, we could do 2 sessions a month. This will be the price. And then you explain it to the person. Yeah, so I've never managed to create that. I've done loads of great coaching engagements with that structure, but never managed to move people into the rolling thing because it's never felt right. And for me, I don't know, like I say, endings are maybe too important. Alex, what are you noticing?
2 things that stand out there is like, I imagine the thought is, and I don't know if it's true, if you zoomed out on your entire body of work as a coach, I think there's probably quite a few engagements that if you looked at them lengthways, there is actually that rolling element and their chapters that open and close. And so someone that you've done that 4-month, far more intensive thing has come back in another context where you've then done 6 sessions over a period of time. Because the thing that jumped out to me is, I think, the insight around that framework is really helpful because it reflected, and that framework being the period of time, no fixed number of sessions. I really enjoy that thought of we'll do something quite intensive and quite deep here. But I also really enjoy we're quite clear on this piece of work that needs doing, that maybe to bring Miles Downey, and he often talks about all coaching is being for performance and the learning is a product of this period of work over time. And therefore the insight that comes to my mind is actually, it's probably there's 2 things. There's a question of what is coaching for and what is our coaching for? Do we want it to be for? Because there are times where I've worked with people and sense that what they really need is just that consistent thinking space, that they can put all of their thoughts on the table navigate through them and then work out, okay, where am I and where am I going? But by the end of it, it doesn't mean there's necessarily like a profound insight or that magic that often we falsely measure ourselves against as coaches. And so I think it does feel right to say that as coaches, there is an art to noticing what is the work I love doing and but at the same time offering what feels right. And there's almost like a Venn diagram, isn't there? This is the stuff I love doing. These are the things I offer, and trying to bridge them as much as possible. But, if you have that intuition that you really want to work with someone, but the way you work isn't going to work for them, then what is a way that will work for both of you? Because, again, this is Philip Crocker, which shows how recent that episode is. Like, he often talks about co-creation, and I think it is that, isn't it? It's like, let's co-create this thing together of, well, what do you really need? Because if we're really listening, really that will be the best thing to propose for them.
Yeah, really important. It goes back to what you were saying, Alex Swallow, about, showing different frameworks on this show and enabling people to then make choices. And that's like an important value for you, but it is for me. And it was part of the grounding of the show, really, was people often feel a victim of the coaching industry. Like, I have to be doing it this way. There's nothing I can do, and actually what we can show them is you could choose. You could choose to do it how I said in that video that Alex has been talking about. You could choose to do how Bill said to do it, or you could choose to do something completely different. And that's partly what we're showing. And I think you're so right, Alex Whitton, that, over time, really all coaching, and this is my view, right? So this is like values of mine, right? But really all coaching should be co-created, right? It should be bespoke every time. That's why I love that period of time engagement, because it means it's always bespoke to what that person wants and needs. And they get to choose it and we get to create it together. But it's useful to have a menu of ways of working so that when you're sitting with somebody, you can honestly be saying to them, I don't know how we'll work together until we've really worked out what this job is. And then once we've worked out what the job is, I'm going to say, yeah, actually, I think we can do it like this. Or sometimes I'll say to people, I actually think I'm the wrong coach because, especially when I used to work, I used to say that more when I didn't have that. So a useful thing about that engagement from Bill is I have a thing that I now know I like doing, which is less intense. Because I used to sometimes say to people, look, I just think I'd be overkill. The way I work is intense. It'd be overkill for what you're facing right now. You'd be better off with somebody or something else. But we can be always co-creating. And a good thing, a good way to do that is to have a set of ways we might work. Alex Swallow, I'm curious, you could do more reflections on this, but we've talked about it quite a lot. I'm wondering what I'm curious about now is what's top of your list for practical takeaways?
Yeah, I'm actually going to take both those things because I had a very quick ad I wanted for yours, and then I'll go straight into mine. The ad was just a build on what Alex Whitton was saying about, in some ways you do have a rolling program because people come back to work with you. But in the other way as well, because you're a very visible coach, as in you have this podcast and you have books and you write regularly. I find that, for example, when I've had coaching from you in different forms, I never feel also, I know you, but I find that I always have a way to tap into the mind of Robbie that gives me prompts for my own thinking. And so I think that's another way to do it, is that people are always tapping into your insights, but as we were talking about earlier, things that then bring insight for them. So there's never going to be that hard stop potentially with you that there might be for that part of work, but they can easily find what you're doing and apply it to their own life a bit.
So interesting for us to think about, for all of us to think about content creation. But for sure, interesting for me, because then I think that is what I was just saying really a minute ago, that we get, one of the reasons I think it's interesting to have that a more intense way of working is it really makes people choose, actually, is now the right time to be paying Robbie quite a lot of money per hour, going back to what we might talk about it, for these conversations? Or is there a better way for me to be spending my money and a better way for me to be choosing to use my time? So I think I do kind of deliberately make people do that, partly because I never want to be, and I've had this a little bit with some coaching type things, because but I never want to be someone's unused gym membership, right? That they should have given up years ago, right? Let's actually choose whether this is the right thing. I think we have, the Coach's Journey community has a little bit of that feel because it's really accessible financially. So mostly people don't have to, we'll still have to choose, but they don't have to be this is the end, right? We can phase it out. But sorry, that's another digression. Alex, let's hear one from you.
Yes, so mine was from an episode with Chris Joseph, episode 19. And the particular point I'm talking about comes about an hour and 5 minutes in. But it's kind of, in order to sort of truly capture the moment, I think you probably need to listen to the whole podcast, because the bit for me, I was reflecting on the fact, in preparing for this call, I was reflecting on the fact that actually for me, I think I learned very much from almost what people do rather than what they say, or what people do rather than they say about what they do. So going back to that inspirational point earlier, I find that I like to ascribe my own interpretation to that, because then I can apply it to my life. So with Chris, it's one of my favorite people you've had on the podcast, one of my favorite episodes. I just find him a hugely impressive person. The bit I'm referring to is when he basically lost a large amount of money in a Ponzi scheme. And if people see the title of the episode, that's actually mentioned. It's sort of, front and center in that.
It's a crazy story, isn't it?
It's an incredible story. But the reason why it's so interesting for me is that basically either side of that thing, he's just hugely successful. So, in terms of he was an academic, and then I think he realized he didn't want to do that, wanted to do more coaching. Now he's a very successful coach. He's someone I continue to follow online, and he does sort of Ironman marathon type things. He's just a really impressive individual in a lot of ways. And what's great about this, the way he explained what happened for me was two things. The firstly, that he was able to share it, which is, here's a person who, all I would have known about him had he not mentioned it was that he was ultra successful. Like, I haven't heard him mention it anywhere else. Maybe he has, but I've only ever heard it on that podcast episode. So I wouldn't have known it had he not been brave and mentioned it. And secondly, you see this, what actually it did, as I understand it, what it inspired him to go even more into coaching and to really drive his business forward, partly because he needed to from a financial perspective. So the reason it resonated with me, while I've never been caught up in a Ponzi scheme, or if I have, I don't know about it. This might be a very sad episode for me in years to come if I am and I didn't know about it. Even though I'm not caught up in that, it was just more that point that we all have these periods of sort of seeming failure in our life or low points, and those could be professional, personal, a mix of both. And so my personal one would be that I was a chief executive of a charity which ran out of money and I had to leave my post. And this was when I was in my early 30s. And for me, it was that, that was a culmination of the work I put in academically, my career. And I was very proud of that job. And I really liked the work the charity did, etc. And when I left, it wasn't that I was, really, really upset. It was the right thing to happen. But the way that Chris came out of his period of difficulty, came back stronger, didn't let it define him, was just really inspiring to hear. And it was basically, there's a sort of inflection point. So it could be viewed as an inflection point in his career, or it could be viewed almost as a blip in his career. But essentially, he didn't let it define him. And he even had some quote, there's some beautiful quote, if you listened again about an hour and 5 minutes, where he describes this, where he says something like, it was the best money he ever spent on coaching to learn that lesson from what happened. I'm sure I'm butchering his quote, there's something around that. And so for me, it's a lesson that I just, continue to take with me. Here's a person I hugely admire, outside very successful, had something that for some people might have been okay, that was it now. They were successful and then never again. And then has just completely flown and been inspiring. And so for me, that's one of the great things about the podcast, is that some of the personal lessons, when people come on the podcast, they're not only talking about their business, they're talking about really difficult, hard things happening to them, as well as the trials and tribulations of their business. And so that for me is, that lesson from Chris is just something that I try to apply. I was going to say, appropriately for him, I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's not like I'm suddenly going to be I'm always going to be happy with adversity, or I'm never going to feel bad about things that happen to me. But certainly from a perspective of coaching in the coaching industry, he's a person I really admire, and he was able to completely get past that, I think, and even learn from it. And I just thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, so beautiful and such a great moment on the show. So, let me just, this may not land, so if it doesn't, bat it away or whatever, but let's imagine somebody's listening, and they feel what you just said, and they're wondering, how am I going to actually use this? What are the moments when, I don't know, do you bring it to mind? Is it just that it's seeped into you? How do we all take that, remember it, hold it, and then use it?
I think it's two things. One, I think it's seeped into me, and it seeped into me, I suppose, alongside other lessons from people who faced adversity, maybe more from outside the coaching sector. But as a coach, he's definitely someone who inspires me in that way. But I think it's also just that realization that one of the things I really like about the podcast is that I feel there's some really big names on the podcast, some people who, when you first come into coaching, you're like, oh, you read their books, you hear about these people. And then there's some people that, partly due to our personal connections and interests as the co-host, and for you a long way stretching back, Robbie, we're kind of introducing to people. They're almost like best kept secrets, or not enough people know about them possibly. One of the things is, when you look at the people who are really considered top of the coaching profession, is that it's really important to realize that they're human too, as silly as that sounds. So that, there's so many people out there that you might look up to, and you might admire somebody who's not at that very highest level, but is a few stages on from you. And the thing is to realize that at one point, everybody didn't know what to charge for their coaching. At one point, everybody didn't have enough clients. At one point, and especially in the past when a lot of the big figures were starting, there just weren't many coaches around, many people to talk to about this stuff. And there weren't podcasts with people talking about the things that we're talking about. And so I think it's that moment with Chris, it was also a way to sort of humanize him, because otherwise he'd definitely be someone that I might put on a pedestal and think, oh, he's brilliant despite these, or because of these things that have happened. Not that his career has always just gone on this, soul trajectory. And that's the kind of a lesson I think I take with.
Yeah, so good, Alex. So we're going to do one or two more each, but we're going to do them pretty quick. I'm going to do two. One is from the last interview that I did, I think, which was with Amy Brand, which came out at the end of last year. It's actually not hers, but in her book, she has this great quote where she says, "A coach is an expert in facilitating self-directed neuroplasticity." So you have to go back to that interview to hear us talk about neuroplasticity, which is probably the most hope-filled piece of neuroscience that I think has ever been done, because basically it's about how our brains can change, which means that all the stuff that we talk about in coaching is, on some level true. We can take that, but for anybody, you can change the literal structure of your brain. But what is great about that is it's a great sales tool. So, everybody loves neuroscience. People love it. Not everybody, but loads of people love neuroscience. They feel like anything that has neuroscience behind it suddenly is worth buying. Neuroscience backed, you see on stuff. So neuroscience backed coaching, right? You could just, for the right person. And I said it to somebody, and I think he was gonna say yes to the coaching anyway, because his manager was paying, and we had a great conversation. But when I explained that to him, that really what we were going to be doing, I gave him something like that definition, which I just read now, I should say. It's in the intro of Amy's book, Neuroscience for Coaches. But I gave him some version of that, and you could just see the both this is exciting to do, and also this sounds worth doing. Right? This is worth paying money for, to kind of rewire the brain. And there's another cool thing somewhere in her book, which we talked about a bit, which is, in a way, with coaching, what we're here to do is, we are here to help people decide the new habits they want to create, and then hold them and support them while they change their brain so that they can actually do and keep those habits. Again, so it's another neuroplasticity move. And we get that sense then of okay, that makes sense. Whether it's literal habits or ways of thinking or mindsets or energy or whatever it might be, we ask them usually at the start, what are we here to do? Yeah, Miles's language, what's the job? Or, what's the vision for this work? And then we still need the coaching, right? And what we're doing in the coaching is we're continuing to do this, create that thinking space so that people can begin to rewire rewire the brain in new ways. So that's one. And then the other, I've actually got another one from this person. So the other one is from Marsha Reynolds. And you two have been on the Coach's Journey community a bit. Probably have heard me use these two because they're just such great. I'll do one now, actually, and then we'll see if we've got time for the other. Otherwise, everyone will have to go and listen to Marsha to find out what it is. There's two just great shortcuts. And again, it's a little hard for me to separate the kind of research I did for the podcast. Can't remember if 100% if we talked about both of these in that interview or if they're out of the book that she was talking about at the time. But one of them is, she says, people who come to her coaching, she's noticed over the years, and she's done thousands and thousands of hours, that people who come to her coaching sessions wanting help making a decision usually don't actually need help making the decision. They need help finding the courage to take the decision that they've already taken. And so, as soon as you've heard that, you can see it in clients, right? You start to hear like somebody says, they just talk about the two options and it's completely obvious which one is the one for them. And so, but what's nice about that, I just tell that little story exactly like I've just told it here, that Marsha, who I spoke to once, anyone listening could say Marsha, who I heard on this podcast, who's done thousands of hours, she says this, how true, like, what do you notice about that? And that's all you have to say. And then often people will go, yeah, that is what it is. And it's not that the coaching's over at that point, because you still got to find the courage, but it changes the energy of the conversation. So instead of us doing all this work about pros and cons, we're suddenly in, okay, really what you want to do is do this thing, and we've just got to work out how you can do it. So there's two from me. Alex Whitton, obviously bounce off that because we haven't heard from you for a while if you want to, but then also be great to hear one or two more before we hear from Alex and then wrap up. Cool.
Yeah, I think I'm in some ways building on both that and like what Alex Swallow was saying about Chris Joseph. There's a very practical thing from Chris Joseph that I really like that resonated with me, which is actually maybe a broader point. He talked about like an invitation to a coaching conversation is a gift in itself. And that was really freeing for me because of, I think, what has landed in what you were saying, Alex, and like a really big challenge, but a reminder that the whole podcast gives me is that like almost maybe the most important thing we can do as coaches for a sustainable and impactful business is to constantly humanize ourselves and others, because it's so easy to get caught up in the numbers and the business, like the health of the business, how many people am I coaching, that's how good a coach I am. I was actually, and it's really interesting because when I started listening to Coach's Journey, maybe 3-4 years ago, I took some notes as I listened to it. And I literally, like, Phil Bolton mentioned it in some way, or the notes I have for Phil Bolton, Kat Horry, Minor Arias, like Joel Monk, some of the early episodes. I must confess I didn't manage to read all my notes before this call, so I'm sure actually, but there was I saw the Claire Norman one, and it was also a similar thread, is like focus on serving in what you do as a coach. That I'd just written down, and it's so long ago since I listened to it, I don't know whether it's Joel said it or it was a thought, but I really liked it, which is like the idea, the bigger you play, the more people want to play with you. But it's just like both that and this idea of like serving, and it's that humanizing thing. It's like when we get caught up in thinking about our business, and I noticed recently I always shirk at the words like sales and leads, but they're important things, and so we shouldn't shirk at them. It's just like also, well, what's to think of them in a human way? It's like, well, sales and leads are a reflection of how much I'm serving or able to serve. And yeah, so it's almost like, in what way can we bring back the human in what we're doing? It feels like that inflection point you were saying, Alex. It's like there's huge inflection points in the journey of being a coach, but they're actually those like daily ones. And so, and interestingly, if you listen to all of those episodes, I'm thinking off the top of my head, like Phil Bolton and Minor Arias both talk about like big inflection points. Phil, when he left his like really well-paying coaching role to go full-time for himself, was stuck watching Bargain Hunt and like had an inflection point there. And then, but Minor, I remember talking about like he was very quickly running out of money. And there was also a beautiful inflection point where his like call to coaching was where I think his son was playing, and he was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And his son was like, "I'm making like a PowerPoint because that's what you do and like what you always do." And there was that moment of like, really don't want this to be what I'm known for by like my children, is that I'm always working, making slides. And so I realized that became quite meandering. Like maybe there's two things there. It's just like lots of these episodes that I've mentioned it's around, you know, how can we best serve? And it's funny because you mentioned Marsha Reynolds, Robbie, and the only thing I remember from that episode is the book title of the book, which was Coach the Person and Not the Problem. And like, that's probably really good advice for us as well, in that if the problem in our business is we haven't got enough clients, before like trying to resolve that problem, actually, if the problem isn't a problem to solve, like what's the thing that I need as a person to be able to like navigate that challenge?
So nice. And I've forgotten that about Minor and his son. Oh yeah, I love that you remembered that. Alex Swallow, have you got one or two more to give us before we wrap up?
Yeah, I've got one more. And first, just to say, in the spirit of humanizing, I realized that, you know, but before we're recording this episode, I made sure I had a glass of water. I was all prepared. And then I suddenly realized that I hadn't plugged my laptop in. And it was like the energy bar of doom was scrolling down. And I felt my energy sort of going in proportion to that, because I wasn't sure whether it would last to the end. So I just had to duck and do it.
Just to interrupt, like, because this is a great one that I think about all the time that I'd forgotten about from the Coach's Journey podcast. Jamie Smart saying partway through, Robbie, I have this thing that I say to all my clients, which is that I'll do everything I need to do to be present with you. And that includes going for a pee. So I need to go for a pee now, Robbie. Gonna have to pause. And we left that in because it's such a good teaching moment, right? So it's right. Like, and we have to, but with tech, like we can get too trapped in like being an inhuman coach, right? Who never needs to do anything or anything like that. Like we can use all those things. Just like sometimes you have to plug in your laptop, and no one should feel stressed out about doing that in a coaching session. The more stressed out you feel, the less present you are, the less you're focused on the person, the less you're in service. So yeah, if anyone needs to go for a pee in the middle, just remember you can use Jamie Smart as an excuse. Alex, sorry though to interrupt. What's now that your laptop is not ticking down to batteryless doom and you won't disappear from our call? Thank you for plugging in. What stands out as a practical takeaway?
Yeah, so the other one I wanted to share was Marie Quigley, who I interviewed episode 71. And the particular bit I'm talking about is 46 minutes in. And it was, so again, it kind of ties in a bit to the Chris Joseph one, as in Marie's somebody that I hugely admire. But at that point, she's talking about like getting her first clients, basically. And so to sort of paraphrase the story a bit, she is in a cafe in Dubai. I think it was a difficult time economically for the world, and lots of people were losing their jobs. She overhears three women in a cafe talking about their husbands losing their jobs. And she basically goes over to them and says, I'm a coach, I'm a new coach. She writes her details on a napkin and she hands it to them. And she offers to basically do some pro bono coaching for their husbands. And as I understand it, she does perhaps a bit of a cut husbands, a bit of one of the women. But what it ends up with was, after she's done, I think maybe with one of her husbands, some coaching, he brings her into the organization to do some coaching. And so it all goes from there. So again, talking about these like inflection points. But she speaks about how, you know, was something a bit out of the ordinary for her, but it was born out of necessity. She needed the money. And also she saw a need, I suppose, of these people right in front of her. And she thought, this is something I can help with. So I think there's a really useful lesson there. Firstly, it goes back to that thing I was just saying quite recently about how, you know, everyone started from somewhere. You know, Marie's a brilliant coach, she's an MCC coach. She still started off getting her first clients, not being sure about different things. So I think that is a really useful lesson. And then the second lesson there is really about the ways in which you can sort of be brave in your business, in your coaching business, and, you know, continue to put yourself in new situations which might or might not lead to something. And you don't know that they are going to lead to something, and you may have to put yourselves in a lot of situations before they do. But I thought that was just a beautiful story of how she didn't even know those people. She heard a need. She thought she could help and she could do something, and then it led to something. And I just thought that's a really helpful example.
Yeah, so nice. Creating clients by writing details on a napkin. Such a cool story. But also, like, back to the start, right? Perfect moment to do that with those people and then to end up being invited in. And they don't all lead like that. But what we know is she doesn't get invited into that company if she doesn't write any details on a napkin for some strangers in a cafe. And who knows when wing-peeled Kairos is flying over a cafe in Dubai, right? So team, we're almost at the end of the time for this episode. Before we finish, any last things that either of you want to share? Does that awkward silence mean no?
Yeah, I think I've got plenty to take from this. So yeah, it's been a wonderful exercise. Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, Alex. And Alex Swallow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. And Alex Swallow, anything you want to share before we sign off?
Yeah, just kind of the same as I was just thinking earlier, how much I've just enjoyed this conversation. And I'd say the one thing I would say is that I think when people are listening to the podcast, they get the opportunity to listen to a range of coaches. And part of it is having that sense of community, like other people are in this situation too, whether it's getting clients, but also just the general things everybody struggles with. So one thing that I hope the podcast also inspires people to do is to build their own community of coaches. I mean, I found that partly through the Coach's Journey community, the community associated with the podcast, but also now I've got to know the other co-hosts more. But I think that's so important because it's such a regularly observed and yet overlooked fact in life that actually, as human beings, there's so many commonalities between us with the things that we all struggle with. And so many people I notice, and I do it myself in the coaching profession, feel that the things we're struggling with are unique to us and somehow a reflection on our failings rather than a common thing which could unite us. So if I said to somebody, I'm struggling with this, and they're also struggling with it, that actually brings us together. So I hope that these sort of conversations inspire people to build their own communities as much as possible in coaching.
So nice, Alex. Beautiful place to end. Except to say that, for example, I spoke at one of your coaching communities a few weeks ago as we're recording, the Sheffield Coaching Exchange. Look them up if you're in South Yorkshire. Ruth, one of the co-hosts, has just launched a coaches walking group in Leeds. And there are other, we'll put a link to in the show notes. You can find other coaches walking groups. There's a LinkedIn group for that. There are lots of these places that already exist. And if not, you can create them. And that it is, I'll always remember Rich Litvin saying that that's where some of his coaching programs would come from. It's like, who do I want to be hanging out with? What's the community that I need? Well, you can build it. So look, we hope you've enjoyed this episode that, started with like beautiful inspiration and then got super practical and with a whistle-stop tour of the coach's journey over the last few years. We'll put links to all those things in the show notes. These days, we're particularly focused as well on pulling out some of these moments. So Alex gave you some great timestamps there. We haven't done that for the ones that Alex Whitton and I mentioned. But there are Coach's Journey shorts. There are videos on the YouTube channel where you can find little snippets from the episodes. And of course, so check those out. Be in touch with us if you want signposting to any more of the things we've talked about. And you'll be able to find links wherever you're listening and at thecoachesjourney.com. And look, we hope we have you back with us on the show sometime soon.
Hi everybody, Robbie here, and just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. Thanks for getting all the way to the end of this episode. I'm imagining that means that you think the work we're doing is important and valuable, and we think so too. And that's why I want to tell you about a way to support the Coach's Journey and get coaching from me and be part of an amazing group of coaches. That is, join the Coach's Journey community. It's my flexible, affordable group coaching program for coaches. You pay between £20 and £100 a month and get access to a certain number of group coaching calls every year, plus some one-to-one time with me if you're a full member and various other benefits. And of course, you get the chance to be connected to other amazing coaches on their own journeys. You can join the community at thecoachesjourney.com/community. You can also become a supporter of the podcast if you want to give financial support to us, but the community isn't right now. Find out more about that in the show notes wherever you're listening. And if neither of those things is right for you right now, please click subscribe or follow wherever you're listening to this podcast. It really makes a difference to us being able to continue to keep the show free. Thanks so much to everyone who supported the Coach's Journey over the years, but in particular, Thank you to Alex Whitton, Alan Bedding, Alison Malone, David Norris, Jessica Jem, Linda Ransom, and Lucy Braun for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.